The giant of fear can be a real monster. Fear comes in so many packages and can cause such distress. Fear is one of the most paralyzing of all human emotions. It can rob us of reason and faith. It makes a bad situation worse than it really is, and it saps us of energy and confidence. Let's watch as Skip takes a classic Bible story and makes it come alive in our lives today. Let's consider how fear works and by what means it can be defeated as we look at 1 Samuel chapter 17.
The Bible says God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Amen. I want to talk to you today about that. I suppose that everybody has a certain amount of what they would call caution, healthy fear, keeps us alive. I happen to have a fear of oncoming traffic, so I won't be walking out in that anytime soon. Some people have a fear of heights. That, to a certain degree, can be good for obvious reasons because gravity still works. But fears can become irrational. They can paralyze us. They can cause us to think and act in a frantic kind of a way. And I suppose that whatever fears that people have, that they have been added to this past year and a half, by a number of things. So now there's a fear of a virus. There's a fear of economic free fall. There's fear now of terrorism resurfacing because of the events of the last couple of weeks. Fear starts when we're young. Kids have all sorts of irrational fears, from fear of the dark to fear of monsters under their bed. They might be fearful of crocodiles, even if they live in Rio Rancho. Again, it doesn't make sense, but kids have those fears. We learn them, and we carry them. One little boy, 12 years old, 7th grader named Quentin, said, "My biggest fear is a test." He goes, "I'm afraid of it because it's like you know the material, but when it's in front of you, your brain shuts off." An 8-year-old girl named Cheyenne said, "My greatest fear is my future. Now that I'm in 3rd grade, I'm afraid my future will start happening. Soon, I'll start getting scholarships and free enrollments in college. It's just that life is rolling by way too fast." Besides fears, there are what mental health experts call phobias. And they call that a type of anxiety disorder. And according to the best literature, 30% of all Americans have a phobia. The number one, I found this very interesting, the number one phobia of the American public is called Tripanophobia. It's the fear of needles. I think that's interesting, especially right now, right? Trying to roll out vaccines. They should just keep in mind 30% of people are dealing with phobias, and the number one phobia people have is they don't like needles. There are others. There's second on the list is called, I'm going to try to work this out, pteromeranophobia, which is the fear of flying. Then claustrophobia, the fear of enclosed spaces. Entomophobia, the fear of insects. Ophidiophobia, the fear of snakes. My son and wife do not have that phobia. Cynophobia, the fear of dogs. Astrophobia, the fear of storms. There is even something called phobophobia. It is the fear of fear. It's the fear of being afraid. I don't want to laugh these off or marginalize it. If you have one of these phobias, it comes at a cost. It comes at a physiological response, typically raised heart rate, shortness of breath, sweating, adrenaline rush. All those things are real things that happen in the body. We've been looking at hunting giants. That's the name of our series. We've sort of looked at giants analogously, metaphorically, but today we consider a real giant named Goliath. You know the story, you know it so well, and this chapter is so long, I'm only going to give you elements of it because I believe you know it that well. Everybody does who has been in church for any length of time. It is the most famous battle in the Old Testament. It's not between two armies, it's between two individuals. And the people of Israel in this battle, it is told us twice, are fearful. It says they were greatly afraid, then they're tremendously afraid, and then, you know the story, in walks this kid, a teenage kid. David was no more than a young teenager when this happened. And he comes in almost like he's whistling, and he's like, what, a giant? So what? I mean, it's that kind of unusual faith in the midst of fear that makes the story so noteworthy. Did you know that 63 times the Bible tells us, fear not? Fear not, or do not be afraid, 63 times if you count them. If you look at all the derivations of that command, over 300 times we are told not to be controlled by or gripped by fear. I was reading the other day an article in the Huffington Post that said 85% of all the things we are afraid of never happen. 85% never happen. One man said, my life has been filled with terrible misfortune, most of which never happen. Of the 15% that happens, we discover we can handle it better than we thought we could, that it's not that bad, or there are great lessons to be learned by it. What I want to do in looking at this chapter is give you 4 truths about fear. 4 truths about fear. First of all, fear is intimidating. Now, I'm just going to kind of ease you into the story and pick out a few verses. So, on one side of a valley, I want to set the scene for you in your mind. On one side of a valley, and the valley is about a mile wide. You can visit it today, the Valley of Elah. On one side is a hill, and the other side is a hill. The army of Israel was on one hill, the army of the Philistines was on the other hill. They would go down the hills into the valley and choose each other off. Until one day, a huge guy comes walking onto the scene, the champion he is called in verse 4, a champion from Gath, a Philistine city. His name is Goliath. And chapter 17, verse 4 tells us how high he was, how tall he was. It says 6 cubits and a span. Now, 6 cubits and a span is anywhere from 8.5 feet to 9.5 feet tall. The envy of every NBA team around. The original Bigfoot was Goliath. And then, here's where we're going to jump into our reading. Verse 8 says, he stood and he cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves. Let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, we'll be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you're going to be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and, here it is, greatly afraid. Greatly afraid. Who wouldn't be looking up at a big old 8.5 to 9.5 foot beast? Now, some people have problems with this story. They go, oh, come on. You don't really believe that literally, like that actually happened. That's like a myth. People don't grow that tall. Well, you need to do your history if you think that way, because back in 1918, in Alton, Illinois, a baby was born named Robert Wadlow, and when he was born, he was 8 pounds, 5 ounces. A little on the big side, but not out of normal range. By the time Robert Wadlow was 13 years old, he was 7 feet 8 inches. Wow. That's a tall 13-year-old, wouldn't you say? He had a certain condition that rendered him that tall. When he was fully grown, he was 8 foot 11 inches, roughly this size, Goliath size. When he died, it took 12 men to carry his casket. The casket was 10 feet 9 inches. So it happens even in our modern time. So let's just kind of push that it's a myth, push that aside. But to be fair, let me also tell you that there are some translations of the Old Testament that give it a different rendering of height. So if you were to look at the Masoretic text of the Old Testament, if you were to look at the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, if you were to look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, or you were to look at the writings of Flavius Josephus, they don't say he's 6 cubits and a span, they say he's 4 cubits and a span, which would make him, if that's the accurate translation, would make him 6 foot 9. Now, I had a brother that was 6 foot 8. I'm 6'5". That would make Goliath 6 foot 9. You go, come on, that didn't sound very dramatic. That ruins my whole Sunday school concept. And that's, I mean, you get a lot of guys in Israel who would fight that guy. No, you wouldn't. Especially when you realize that at 1000 BC, that's when this takes place, in 1000 BC, the average height of the Israeli male was 5 foot 3 inches. So picture in your mind LeBron James, he's 6 foot 9, fully clothed with a coat of mail for a battle, next to Danny DeVito. Right? You got the picture? You'll never unsee that. So this guy, however tall he was, comes with a coat of mail that is 125 pounds. The head of his spear, we are told, is, in converting it, 15 pounds. That's the head of his spear. So it's like a sledgehammer with a point. He comes into the valley, and he has a whole different idea of how to do a battle. He goes, let's not do army to army, let's do man to man, mano a mano. Let's just do hand-to-hand combat, one-on-one. Winner takes all. If I win, you're all of our servants. If you win, one guy, one man, will be your slaves. Now, there was one man in Israel who was taller than everybody else. What was his name? King Saul. King Saul, we are told, was head and shoulders above everyone. He should have been the guy, but he is not the guy. He has got his tail between his legs, and he is hiding somewhere. He is not up for this battle. By the way, just a thought, maybe that's how nations should do battles. Maybe we should, leaders are so quick to commit young men and women to the battlefield. Maybe these nations who don't get along, the leaders should just fight each other. Now, I'm not recommending that during the current leadership that happened, we would be in big trouble. But it's a thought. Now, what they saw that day overwhelmed them. It intimidated them. Goliath had everything you would need to intimidate people. I read an article in Psychology Today. It was an article about a man by the name of Bill Stratton. They used him as an example. Bill Stratton is a poet. He teaches writing. Now, how intimidating does that sound? I'm a poet. Not very intimidating, but Bill Stratton is also 6 feet 5 inches tall, very broad-shouldered, deep, powerful voice, and a pretty large beard. So here's the story in Psychology Today. He was like running through a park one day. He noticed a couple, an elderly couple, who looked like they needed help. They needed first aid. So he goes over to them to help them, and he said, I could see the fear in their eyes as I approached. I tried to stand at a distance, put my hands in my pockets, but, here's a guy, 6'5", broad-shouldered. Can I help you? No! So he went on to find somebody less intimidating looking than him to go help him. And the article in Psychology Today simply said that people who are tall or loud or smart or outgoing type A personalities often bring intimidation with them, causing others to be afraid. Now, David will come on the scene and he will not be intimidated. He will see the same thing they see, but he is not going to have the level of fear or intimidation that they have. And here's one of the reasons why. You remember when Samuel came to the house of Jesse? This is the chapter right before. I know you know this as well. And Samuel is there to find the next king. He says, God said, go to the house of Jesse. You're going to find a king. So Samuel has all of Jesse's sons line up. David is the last. He's out in the field. He finally comes in. The first guy that's standing before Samuel is the oldest boy named Eliab. He's tall. He's good looking. Samuel thinks, this is the guy. He's got a horn of oil. He's about to pour it on Eliab. And God stops and says, stop. I've rejected him. This is not the king. And then God explains, for God does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. God looks at the heart. Man looks at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. Now, there's a lot of truth in that statement. Man does look at the outward appearance. We do look at people and we size them up. We are impressed or not impressed. And when we're around them and we meet them, if they outthink us or outsmart us or outdress us or whatever it might be, we might feel a little fearful and intimidated. David comes on the scene, sees what they see, but he doesn't have the same reaction they have. And here's why. What we see is often a matter of how we see. What we see is often a matter of how we see. You can have two people see the same thing exactly and have two different responses. Ever been in a movie theater at a 3D movie? Anybody ever see a 3D movie? Raise your hand. Remember, we used to go to movies one time? There were movie theaters, they were called in America. 3D movies you have, what do you wear? You wear glasses. So when you wear glasses, you see things differently than if you take off your glasses. Or if you're sitting there with glasses next to a guy who's looking at the same thing without the glasses, you're going to look at the same thing, but you're going to see two different things. One of my favorite stories is about three people at the Grand Canyon. One was an artist, one was a pastor, a minister, one was a cowboy. They're looking down into the beautiful chasm of the Grand Canyon, and they start telling their impressions of what they see. So the artist looks, and he first says, wow, what a beautiful scene to paint. And the pastor says, wow, what a magnificent display of the glory and majesty of God. The cowboy looks down and says, wow, what a terrible place to lose a cow. They all saw the same thing, but they saw it differently. So when David arrives, he doesn't see a giant. He sees a big target. I can't miss that. That'll be easy. Because that's so big, even I can hit that. Anybody can hit that. That's how he sees it. But fear is intimidating. A second thing to note about fear, not only is fear intimidating, fear can be debilitating. We go on in the story, you have to notice this in verse 16. The Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Now let's do the math. 40 days, morning and evening, how many times did he present himself? 80 times, right? That's the right math. So in the morning, he got up, had his breakfast, goes down to the valley, shouts, chooses people up, give me a man, come on, let's fight. What are you waiting for, you cowards? Let's go. That's once. Goes back, has lunch, maybe a little siesta, goes down again before dinner, says the same thing, goes back up. Next day, repeat. 80 times, 40 days. Would that wear on you if you heard that? Absolutely. It would be demoralizing to hear that. So keep going, verse 21. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. They're in the valley. David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, came and greeted his brothers. Now stop there for a minute. Let me give you the backstory. David is not in the army. David is a teenager keeping sheep in Bethlehem. His brothers, however, his older brothers, are all in Saul's army. So his dad sends David to the battle with food for the older brothers and to get a report of how the battle's going. That's what David is doing here. He's not in the army, he's too young. So David leaves the supplies, greets his brothers. Hey bro, what's up? Verse 23, as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name. Now watch this, coming up. That's very important that you notice that. Coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were, here it is again, dreadfully afraid. Dreadfully afraid in Hebrew is yareh me'od, which is to be overcome with fear. The NSV, the New Skip version, they were freaked out. They were freaked out. They were crippled with fear. Why? Because they noticed this guy coming up. Now again, the geography is important. There's a valley here in the middle, a mile wide, a hill and a hill on either side, an army on each hill. Typically they come down, yell at each other, nobody's really fought yet, go back. Come down, go back, come down, go back. Goliath gets into the mix, starts yelling 80 times. Come on, give me a man. Finally, Goliath gets closer, crosses the creek, the little brook in Elah. Again, if you come to Israel with us, we'll point this out to you. You can see the whole valley scene right there. And he starts coming up the other side. So now he's not just intimidating, now he's aggressive. Now he's getting closer and closer. He is coming up. Goliath is so much like our adversary. I'm talking about the adversary of our soul, the devil. He tries to intimidate and intimidate and intimidate, and then he'll get closer. He'll come up. He'll move in. He'll take advantage. Francis Thompson said, the devil doesn't know how to sing, only how to howl. But if that howl goes unmet, unchallenged, then he'll come up closer and closer and come after you stronger and stronger. And that's how fear works. Fear works the same way. It grows, it comes up, it becomes irrational, and it keeps you awake at night. If you don't deal with the howling during the day, it comes to you at night. It wakes you up. It plagues your thought life. And counselor after counselor will write or say that the typical question that will come at night like this are questions that begin with what if? What if? Oh, what if this happens? And then what if he does that? And then what if I? And all that. It just gets closer and bigger and debilitating.
More vital insight from Skip about facing the giant of fear next time. But now we've reserved time for 2 important announcements. First, here is our current special resource offer.
The desire to fit in, to be thought of as normal, is a basic human instinct. But would you believe that children as young as 3 years old already want to follow the crowd and fit in with the group? That's what researchers found in a Duke University study. Yet in the Bible, we learn that some of the people who've made the most impact have done so by defying normal. Here's Skip Heitzig.
I think the Bible calls us to a holy defiance of the status quo. Paul the Apostle said, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might prove what is that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God.
So what does it take to go from conformed to transformed? Find out in Pastor Skip's book, Defying Normal. Our thanks when you give $35 or more to expand this Bible teaching ministry. And when you give today, we'll also include the booklet, What on Earth Am I Here For? By Rick Warren. Get your copies of these two bold resources when you call 800-922-1888 or give online securely at connectwithskip.com/offer.
Now Skip and Lenya Heitzig are leading a tour of Israel in May of this year. And Skip has important information in this invitation for you.
Hey, Skip Heitzig here, and I'm so looking forward to our Israel tour next spring. This may be your time to visit the Holy Land. Believe me, nothing compares to studying the scriptures and worshiping together in the actual places where those events took place. I hope you'll make plans to join me on this unforgettable tour. I'll be there, my wife Lenya will be there, and we're going to worship, study, explore, and discover our God in a deeper and transformational way. I really hope you'll join us in Israel next May 4th through the 15th.
There's still time for you to register and get ready for a true trip of a lifetime. The dates are May 4th through 15th of this year with an optional pre-trip to Rome. Call Inspiration Tours at 844-537-4422. That's 844-537-4422. Thanks for joining us. Back next time in our Hunting Giants series on Connect with Skip Heitzig.
Thanks for joining us on Connect with Skip Heitzig. We're connecting you to God's never-changing truth in ever-changing times. This program is brought to you by Connection Communications.